My name is Heartless. I'm 36 years old. I'm the Vice President of Clinical Operations at Meridian Health Partners, a regional healthcare network overseeing 12 facilities across Ohio and Michigan. With a salary of $210,000 and a staff of 340 clinicians reporting up through my division. I was called a heartless woman who abandoned her own grandfather, and at the exact same time, I was the only person in my family who had paid a single dollar toward his hospice care in 2.5 years. My Aunt Carol stood up at my grandfather's celebration of life gathering, in front of 71 people holding paper cups of lemonade, and said, "Some of us actually showed up for Dad. Some of us just wrote checks from the city and called it love." I set my cup down on the folding table, walked to the front desk where the hospice director was standing, and asked her to bring in one folder. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Then hit subscribe because you need to see what was inside that folder. Let me take you back to where all of this actually started. I grew up in Red Grove, Michigan, in a 2-story house on Larchmont Avenue with my father, Gerald Ellis, and my grandfather, Roland Ellis, who lived 2 blocks over on Fenwick Street for as long as I could remember. My Aunt Carol, my father's younger sister, lived directly across the street from Grandpa Roland with her daughter, my cousin Tessa. Tessa was the golden one, a cheerleading captain, then a local real estate agent by 24, though her sales record never once matched the framed top producer plaque she kept in her office window. I was the quiet one who worked weekend shifts at Red Grove General as a nursing assistant at 16, then earned a partial scholarship to Michigan State for health administration, then took an entry-level case manager job at $19 an hour that nobody at family dinners ever asked me a single question about. Aunt Carol introduced Tessa as the one who sells the big houses on the lake. She introduced me for a decade as Gerald's girl. She works in hospitals somewhere. By the time I was 29, I had been promoted twice, first to regional case manager, then to director of clinical operations, under the mentorship of a hospice social worker named Miriam O'Yellerin, a 58-year-old woman with reading glasses always pushed up into gray curls, who had trained me during my very first hospice rotation when a supervisor named Todd Everly told me flatly that, "You're too soft for end-of-life work." Miriam taught me how to read a family's grief without flinching, how to hold a chart in a hand at the same time, and eventually how to hold my own ground in a room full of people who underestimated me. She became the mother figure my own mother, who left when I was 6, had never been. She drove 4 hours to my graduate school hooding ceremony in 2015 when nobody from Red Grove did. On March 14th, 2022 at 6:50 p.m., Aunt Carol called and asked me to quit my job at Meridian and move back into Grandpa Roland's house full-time as his live-in unpaid caregiver, since his congestive heart failure had progressed, and she said she couldn't do it alone anymore. I said no. Not because I didn't love my grandfather, but because I knew professionally and personally exactly what round-the-clock unpaid caregiving does to a person's health and their finances, and I believed Grandpa deserved licensed clinical care, not a granddaughter burning out at his bedside. I told her calmly, standing in my kitchen in Columbus with a legal pad already listing hospice options. She told me I was choosing a paycheck over blood. 9 days later, at a family meeting at Grandpa's own kitchen table, smelling of the instant coffee he always overbrewed, in front of Tessa and my father, Aunt Carol slammed her palm on the table and said, "If you can't be bothered to show up for him in person, don't bother showing up at his funeral either." My father said nothing. Tessa stared at her phone. I didn't cry. I folded my hands, thanked Grandpa for the coffee, and drove the 4 hours back to Columbus in silence, the highway lights the only steady thing that night. My dignity was the one thing nobody at that table could take from me. Year 1 of the silence. I called Grandpa directly every Sunday, since Aunt Carol had made clear I wasn't welcome at the house. Year 2, I started a folder on my laptop labeled simply Grandpa, hospice intake forms, a scanned copy of his advance directive, and one birthday card I'd mailed that came back, not at this address, in handwriting I recognized as Carol's. In April of 2022, 1 month after that kitchen table meeting, I quietly enrolled Grandpa Roland at Willowmere Hospice Center in Red Grove myself, using my own healthcare power of attorney, which he'd signed years earlier without telling anyone else in the family. I paid $1,150 every month directly to Willowmere, out of my own account, and every single Thursday at 6:15 p.m., I drove 4 hours round trip to sit with him for 2 hours before driving straight back for my Friday morning shift. Willowmere logs every family payment and every visit in a physical binder at the front desk. They call the family contribution ledger, plus a digital sign-in system called CareTrack. I never told Carol. I never told Tessa. Grandpa asked me not to because he didn't want another fight in this family about money, and some promises are worth more than being understood. That'd be why the fall of 2023. Meridian promoted me to vice president, and the Red Grove Courier ran a short feature titled Red Grove Native Now Leading Statewide Care Network. 6 days later, Tessa texted me for the first time in 18 months. Hey, saw the article, so proud of you, we should catch up. I knew exactly what that meant, but I said yes anyway, because Grandpa's decline was accelerating and I wasn't going to let pride cost me the time I had left with him. What confirmed it was an accident? On November 2nd, 2023, at 8:47 p.m., Tessa forwarded me a message meant for her mother, still thinking she was texting a different thread in a group chat called the Ellis Circle. It read, "If Marin's making that kind of money, now she should be the one splitting Dad's house and the life insurance with US. Don't bring up the hospice bills yet. Just get her back in the room first." I sat with that message for 3 days before I called an elder law attorney, a precise, plain-spoken man named Foster Kim, just to understand my legal standing given the power of attorney and my payment history. What he told me stopped me cold. Grandpa Roland had quietly named me the sole beneficiary of a $40,000 life insurance policy back in 2022, specifically in his own handwritten note attached to the policy, to pay Marin back for the hospice, since she's the only one who never asked me for anything else. Grandpa Roland passed on January 9th, 2025, at 4:12 a.m., at Willowmere, with me holding his hand and Miriam O'Yelleran standing quietly in the doorway. His celebration of life gathering was held on February 1st, 2025, at the Red Grove Grange Hall. Folding tables, 71 guests, and a slideshow of photos Tessa had put together. My father said a few words about families sticking together no matter what. Then Aunt Carol, holding a paper cup of lemonade, stood up and said it, the line that opens this story, loud enough for the whole hall to hear. The room went still except for the slideshow projector humming in the corner. My father's face went pale, like he already sensed which folder I was about to bring back. I didn't argue. I walked calmly to the hospice director, Patricia Mosu, who had come to pay her respects, and asked if she'd brought the documentation she'd offered me the week before. She had. I opened the folder and turned it so the nearest tables could see clearly. 34 consecutive monthly payments of $1,150 logged under M. Ellis in Willowmere's family contribution ledger, and 136 Thursday visit sign-ins on CareTrack, every one timestamp 6:15 p.m. I have every receipt and every sign-in sheet going back to April of 2022, I said, my voice steady. You're welcome to call Willowmere yourselves on Monday and confirm every line of it. Aunt Carol opened her mouth once more, quieter this time. Maybe the paperwork's wrong, maybe someone else, Patricia answered before I had to. The account was opened under Marin's name, and her card, Carol. I processed it myself. My aunt's composure cracked for the first time in 3 years. Not anger, but something closer to shame. I didn't know he let you visit, she said quietly, her hand trembling around the paper cup. And for one honest second, she looked like a woman realizing the story she'd told herself for years had never actually been true. I was so tired, she added, almost to herself. I needed someone to blame besides me. Tessa's eyes went glassy. She looked down at her phone and said nothing at all. If this is hitting close to home for anyone watching, drop a comment. I want to know I'm not the only one who's carried a bill nobody else knew about. Patricia spoke up gently, the way hospice workers learn to. Roland talked about Marin every single Thursday, she said. He kept a little calendar by his bed, just to count the days until she came. She didn't need to say anything else. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The consequences that followed weren't mine to deliver. They were simply the truth arriving on its own schedule. When Grandpa's will was read the following week, it directed the sale of the Fenwick Street house to first reimburse my hospice payments in full, then split the remainder 3 ways, exactly as he'd quietly arranged with Foster Kim back in 2022. Aunt Carol didn't contest it. My father started calling me every Sunday after that, awkward at first, then real, asking about Meridian, asking about Miriam, asking things he'd never asked in 3 years. Tessa sent me a long message 2 weeks later, apologizing, admitting she'd repeated a story about me she'd never once checked. I left that door open. People deserve the chance to become someone better than the worst thing they've repeated at a memorial. So here's what I want you to take from this. Whoever you are, wherever you're sitting tonight, showing up isn't a performance for an audience, and it was never supposed to need one. It's a debt you pay quietly every single week, whether anyone's counting or not, whether anyone claps for it or not. Grandpa counted every Thursday, even when nobody else in that family did. If somebody rewrites your story because your love was quiet instead of loud, keep your receipts anyway. The truth doesn't need volume. It only needs time, and eventually, it always finds its way to the front of the room. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe, drop a comment telling me which part hit hardest, and share this with the one person you know who's ever carried something alone. I'll see you in the next one.